In this lesson, we will learn how to leverage ChatGPT and GPT-4 to answer common legal questions and basically pretend as if ChatGPT is a lawyer. So let's go ahead and start with our first prompt. So my first prompt is going to be, pretend that you are an expert lawyer in California, US. What are the potential consequences of DUI or driving under the influence conviction? So if you press enter, here we go. Basically, you will get a quick answer telling you, as an expert lawyer in California, I can tell you that the driving under the influence of DUI conviction can have severe consequences. And basically, there are fines, there is like jail time, there is ignition, interlock device or IID, and there's many as well explanation here, which is basically it's really accurate. Okay, let's go ahead and ask another question. Let's assume that right now I would like ChatGPT to pretend that it's an expert lawyer in Toronto, Canada. And I'm asking ChatGPT to assume that my rented house contains mold and my landlord doesn't want to fix it. How do I handle this dispute with my landlord? You press enter. Here we go. I'm going to tell you first, you need to notify your landlord. And then you need to get a mold inspection. If that doesn't work, you need to consult with a lawyer. And then you need to contact the landlord and tenant board. And this is actually pretty accurate. I went through that myself before. And then consider withholding rent at the end. Okay, next, let's ask another question. I'm going to say, pretend that you're an expert lawyer in Toronto, Canada. My new tenant refused to pay rent, for example. How do I handle this dispute with my tenant? Here we go, as an expert lawyer in Toronto, Canada. And what's really powerful as well about ChatGPT is when you mention that you are pretending to be an expert lawyer in a specific location, it basically, because it has already been trained on pretty much the internet, and it knows all the laws with these different jurisdictions and these different states, it can give you a detailed, customized advice, which is super powerful. So you can see here, check your lease agreement, communicate with your tenant, send the notice, file a claim, and then hire a lawyer at the end, and then it's giving you a conclusion as well. Okay. Let's go ahead and maybe assume that we would like to file a will, for example. I'm going to say, what are the legal requirements for filing a will? Here, well, something went wrong, so I need to possibly restart it again. And let's go ahead and try it out. Here we go. The legal requirements for filling up a will is as follows. First, you need the person who's making the will must be a legal age and have a mental capacity as well to write that will. And he's assuming they're at least 18 years old. And then the will must be in writing. The will must be signed by the testator. And then the will should contain a clear and unambiguous statement. Again, it's giving you clear instructions of what are the requirements to file a will. Okay, let's assume that you would like to file, for example, a personal injury lawsuit. And I'm going to say, how do I file a personal injury lawsuit? Can I tell you what? These are simply the instructions. First, you need to get medical treatment. You need to gather evidence. You need to contact a personal injury attorney. You need to draft a complaint, file the complaint, discovery, settlement, negotiation, and then trial. Okay, again, pretty powerful. Next, let's assume that you would like, for example, to maybe file a bankruptcy, for example, and what are the options available? So I'm going to say, here we go. Filing for bankruptcy is a complex legal process that involves various steps and requirements. First, you need to determine your eligibility. You need to choose your bankruptcy type. There are Chapter 7, Chapter 13. You need to complete the bankruptcy forms, file the bankruptcy forms, attend credit counseling, attend the meeting of creditors, and then discharge of debts. Okay, again, pretty powerful. And then what I would like to show you next is I would like to basically show you an article here that has been released recently, talking about GPT-4 and its reasoning capability compared to its previous predecessor, which is ChatGPT or GPT 3.5. And basically, it's telling you that GPT-4 beats 90% of lawyers trying to pass the bar exam. Basically, the intelligence and reasoning ability of the GPT models went from 10%, okay, just I'm talking about specific about the bar exam, to almost beating 90% of lawyers with GPT-4. And this is, again, pretty incredible, super powerful. And I wanted to show you that in action right now by trying to basically getting an exam question from the bar exam and pass that question to GPT 3.5 and pass it to GPT 4 and see if the answer basically differ. I tested it out myself and the answers actually differ, and you'll find that GPT 4 reasoning ability is much better compared to ChatGPT or GPT 3.5 model. Okay, let me show you the where I'm going to get these questions. So here, I have a link to the bar exam sample question. And here you will see that I have a few questions here. For example, this is the first question. Husband and wife were married in state A and lived for 10 years after separating. And basically, the wife claimed that she is entitled to $300,000 in alimony. And the husband appeared in the action has filed a motion to dismiss for lack of subject matter jurisdiction. And basically, you have 4 options here. You can choose the option and then you can submit it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy basically here this text. I'm going to go back and then I'm going to, please note, if I click on new chat, now I'm selecting GPT 3.5. This is simply the ChatGPT, okay, and this is the default. And as I mentioned, this will only score 10% on the bar exam, right? So if you just copy basically the question along with the multiple choices here, I'm going to tell you what the correct answer is D. Yes, because the wife did not establish a domicile in state B, as an example. Let's see if that answer was right or wrong. So if I go back here and if I select choice D and I click submit, and I tell you, well, that's actually wrong. The correct answer was C, meaning that basically GPT 3.5 here actually failed to solve that question. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, please click on new chat. And I wanted to select and see if GPT-4 was able to answer that question correctly. What you notice here is with GPT 3.5, you'll find the reasoning ability has only 3 out of 5. The speed is almost 5 out of 5. It's actually quite fast. And conciseness, only 2 out of 5. However, when you go to GPT-4, you will find that reasoning ability is almost 5 out of 5. And this is kind of scary. And I've tried it out as well with writing code, with doing super powerful as well reasoning. It has incredible reasoning ability that pretty much beats human. So let's go ahead and select GPT-4. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically copy the exact same question. Okay. So I'm going to copy the question, which is, I already have it here. Okay. So I'm going to say copy, come back, and I'm going to paste it here again. And let's see. And it's going to tell you, well, here we go. The correct answer is actually C. It's not D. It's telling you yes, because state courts have exclusive jurisdiction over this type of action. And this is actually correct. And that's exactly what we got here for answers. The correct answer was actually C and not D. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how ChatGPT can help you answer legal questions specifically for business owners. So let's start with our first prompt. So what I'm going to have here is I'm assuming that I work in the field of nuclear energy and I'm conducting interviews for a new role at my startup. And I'm asking basically ChatGPT to tell me, how do I draft a non-disclosure agreement with my new hires? So if you test it out, it's going to tell you, well, NDA or non-disclosure agreement is an important step to protect your startup's intellectual property or IP and confidential information as well. First, you need to identify the information you want to protect. You need to determine the scope of the NDA. You need to write the agreement, and then you need to consult with an attorney as well. As I'm going to tell you here is a sample of NDA clause that you could include in an employment contract. Okay, all right. So what if I would like, for example, let's assume that you work at a startup, and let's say you discovered an invention in a certain area. Maybe it's quantum computing, or maybe it's an AI. And what are the requirements to obtain a patent, as an example? So let's go ahead and test it out. So I'm going to say, well, I discovered an invention in quantum computing. What are the requirements for obtaining a patent? And here we go. It's going to tell you, well, congratulations on your invention in quantum computing. To obtain a patent for your invention, well, first, you must meet the following requirements. It has to meet the novelty. The invention must be new and not previously disclosed in any form, anywhere in the world. It shouldn't be in a form of a research paper, like journal or conference paper, or if somebody else have published that before. It has to be the non-obviousness. It has to offer utility, has a practical application, enablement, written description, and patentable subject matter as well. Okay, what if I would like, for example, to register a trademark for a given business? So if I say, how do I register a trademark for my business? So actually, you can also keep that bullet point here, but here I just prefer to remove it. To register a trademark for your business, you can follow these general steps. First, you can conduct a trademark search, determine the type of trademark, file a trademark application, wait for examination, respond to office actions, and then receive approvals afterwards. And I'll tell you as well quick recommendation at the end. Okay, what if I would like maybe to learn about what are the legal requirements for hiring and firing employees? Again, let's assume that you have a startup and you'd like to maybe hire your first employee as an example, and you'd like to learn about hiring and firing employees. So here we go. They'll tell you, well, the legal requirements for hiring and firing employees can vary depending on the country and state or province. They'll tell you, well, first you need to ensure that you have equal employment and opportunity for everyone. Doesn't matter the race, color, religion, and sex. Employment eligibility verification, you must verify that new employees are authorized to work in the country. You need to ensure that wage and hour laws as well, you are complying with all the laws within that specific country. And of course, employment contract, you can choose to have a written employment contract to outline that or not. But of course, this is not always required. I can tell you as well instructions or requirements for firings. I can tell you employment at will. So in many locations, in let's say US, it's considered to be at will employment. And then just cause, notice requirements, and final pay. And what I could do here is I can basically specify that, let's say I'm talking about, for example, Ontario, Canada as an example. I say, what are the legal requirements for hiring and firing employees in, let's say, Ontario, Canada? And here we go. It's going to tell you, well, in Ontario, Canada, these are basically the requirements. So now we'll find that the answer has changed slightly because now the answer is given specifically to a given state and or given province within Canada. I'll tell you, well, that this would be hiring, for example, and these are the firing. So we'll find that basically it did not mention the US here anymore. You recall, that's what we got here before on the firing part. So in many countries, including the US, this has been removed because now I'm talking specifically about Canada instead. In this lesson, we will learn how to leverage ChatGPT to draft lease agreements, employment contracts, and many more. So first, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to pretend that basically it is a lawyer in Toronto, Canada. And let's assume that I'm going to give a scenario. This scenario could be that I own a place, for example, at a given address, and I would like ChatGPT to draft a lease agreement for us in 1 year, for 1 year of lease. So I'm going to say, pretend that you're a lawyer in Toronto, Canada. I own a place at 4 Spadina Avenue in Toronto, Canada. Draft a lease agreement for 1 year. Well, again, I think OpenAI is going through some capacity limitations. Okay, here we go. So here's a sample lease agreement. And please know that this is just a template. So what's powerful here that basically ChatGPT is going to give you a nice template. I'm not saying this is going to be kind of a replacement to lawyers, for example. You still need to have an expert lawyer to review this. But this is a great starting point. It's going to give you the key items that you need to cover. First, the terms, the property, for example, the address here, and of course you can go ahead and fill up your name and the as a landlord and the tenant as well names. You need to include the rent here, the amount in dollars per month. If there is a security deposit, for example, that you would like to include, what are the use of premises that are available on the property. You need to also include here who is responsible for the maintenance and repairs. It also includes for example, if you allow pets on your property or not, governing laws and the entire agreement as well. And there's a witness here, if any, and include locations as well here to sign the agreement by the landlord and the tenant as well. Okay, what if I would like to assume that, let's say I work at the Human Resources Department and let's say XYZ Tech Inc. And let's assume that I would like to draft an employment agreement for my new engineering hire. And here we go. Let's go ahead and restart it again. Okay, so let's go ahead and test it out here. Here's a draft agreement. I'm going to tell you, well, the employment agreement or the agreement is made or entered between, at the given date, of course, between XYZ Tech Inc. Corporation. It's going to give you under the laws of a specific state or province. And here you have the employee name. And here you're including all the different, basically, terms of the agreement. You have the employment term, you have the position and duties, you have a specific compensation, X dollars per year. You also have here, if you have benefits that you're going to offer to the employee, confidentiality and proprietary information, inventions and patents, terminations, governing laws, entire agreement, amendments, and counterparts. And of course, you can include the signature for both the employee and the human resources or whatever company representative of that company. Okay, let's assume that you are selling your business and you need to draft a purchase agreement and you are looking for a template as an example. So here I'm going to say, well, I'm selling my business and I need to draft a purchase agreement. Can you provide me with a template? Here we go. Certainly. The purchase agreement or the agreement is made at a specific date. I'll give you a nice template, kind of a very good starting point where you can outline here basically the payment schedule, the purchase price, the state of the asset, all the representations and warranties of buyers. And you can also include confidentiality, governing law, wherever the agreement was drafted, basically in whether it's a state or even a state or a province in US or Canada or anywhere in the world. You can also here you find the signature for both the seller and the buyer. Okay, let's assume, and this is kind of quite common, especially if you're running maybe a small business or if you have a startup. Most of the time you're hiring consultants to give you basically or offer you services. So sometimes you would like to draft a service agreement for these specific consulting businesses or consulting services, and you're looking for a template. So instead of just searching on Google, you can just simply ask ChatGPT, I need a service agreement for my consulting business. Can you provide me with a template? And let's go ahead and restart it again. And let's go ahead and test it out. And here we go. Certainly, this is simply a consulting service agreement. It's actually pretty powerful, pretty good. I went through it before. So it's going to tell you this agreement between a given client and between a given consultant. And you can find here the scope of the service, fees and payments, all the expenses, terms of the condition, confidentiality, who owns the work, limitation of liability, governing law, entire agreement, and also the names of basically the client and whoever is offering the service. Okay, let's assume that your company or startup is maybe entering a joint venture with another company and you are looking to draft basically an agreement. Again, I'm not saying this is going to replace basically lawyers. Again, you still, of course, need expert lawyers to go through this, but this is going to provide you with a very good starting point. So let's go ahead and run it again. So I'm entering a joint venture, and here we go. This is a nice, basically, agreement here, kind of a very good starting point. And then finally, let's assume that you would like to draft a non-disclosure agreement for a given business. If you recall, we covered before what are the requirements for non-disclosure agreement in previous lessons. But right now, I would like to ask ChatGPT to actually draft one for me. Here we go. This is the actual agreement. So I'm going to tell you, well, who are the parties involved, what confidential information you're trying to protect. You have the terms and termination, return of information, governing law, remedies, exclusions, signatures. And keep in mind that NDA can vary depending on the specific business relationships, industry, and other factors. It's always recommended to seek legal advice when drafting or signing an NDA.